Okay, so our plan for today, we were hoping that everyone has had the chance to review this in some form. I think it was provided about a month ago. So our thought was to walk through it essentially section by section and be able to answer any questions, talk through any comments. We did get comments from Doug, written comments from Doug in advance, so we can talk to those as we go through the review as well. And then Doug, you can obviously elaborate on any of the comments that you made. But our goal today is really to get feedback from committee members, and then we will go back, make all of the requested updates to the code and be able to provide you an updated draft and move forward with the process from here. Any general questions or overarching questions at this point? I do.
You got a chance to see the plan, right?
Andy, I have an extra copy. This one has Doug's comments on it, but would you like this to reference as we're walking through?
I'm fine with.
You're fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else want an extra hard copy to reference?
I put it up on my computer. Turn my computer on.
Okay, so I just gave away your comments, Doug, so you might have to chime in here and there. I remember a few of them. Okay, so starting with the first section, section 1, which is the overview. You know, I know, Doug, you did note that you would like this section to maybe read a little less regulatory and also talk about the community revitalization, economic development benefits of a form-based code in addition to just the regulatory component. So we will certainly make that update. Did anyone else have any questions or comments on purpose, organization, or how to use the form-based code? So essentially pages 2 and 3.
And so to be clear on this, this will kind of sit within the zoning code, right?
So it will be adopted. What we had originally talked about and I think agreed upon was it will be adopted as part of the zoning, but it will be a standalone document. It will not be integrated. It will be a one-stop shop, essentially.
I think that's positive, right? I mean, for a developer coming in. Yeah.
Simplifies, yeah.
So that's the answer to why the definitions aren't the same as 117.
So
they're all in this one document.
and that's something certainly we want, you know, again, is a kind of reminder. So our scope, big picture scope was right in 2 phases. It was the form-based code, and then it was the other zoning code updates to your main code, right? Which were some tweaks to other districts, creating a new district that would get blended in. And our goal with that was also going to be to rectify definitions. I know that's on hold. You know, currently we're going to wrap up the form-based code and the rest will be on hold given the impacts of the pandemic. But our goal would be the definitions that are in the form-based code that do differ. So there's new definitions that aren't included in your existing code, which are necessary, we think, to explain the context of this code. Definitions that are in your existing code that you might see slightly tweaked or difference or see minor differences here. These are what we're recommending. And ultimately, as we move forward with phase 2, provided that funding becomes available, or maybe this is something we could do independently of us, would be to update your existing zoning code with these definitions. You know, definitions get tweaked here and there. You know, there's better ways to kind of tell the story. So the definitions in here are our recommendations. If you would prefer in any instances to revert back to your existing code definitions, just let us know and we can make those modifications.
Kimberly, and you and I haven't even had a chance to talk yet, but I can just give you a quick update. So the town board adopted the 21 budget last night, which included the financial aspects for us to move forward with phase 2 and 3. So you and I need to connect, obviously, from an operational standpoint, but we can keep moving forward. So.
Nope, that's great news. So that will help to, I think, allow us to rectify the differences that you're seeing.
Yep. And I do have like a listing of all of the definitions that have been added to this form-based code that aren't in the town code and ones that differ slightly from the town code. So if we want to like go back and, you know, look at the town code versus this form-based code definitions, then we can do that.
Okay. So page 4 of the document references the sub-area locations. And I know there was a question about why some of the district crosses Summers Drive. And the reason for that is those are actually on either side of Summers Drive. They're actually the same parcel number and the same owner. So rather than split parcels, we had decided that we would include the entirety of the parcel. We're not required to do that, even though it is the same owner and technically the same parcel. They can be separated. So this is probably a good time for discussion on how we want to move forward with that. Do we want to continue to include those properties on the west side of Summers Drive because of ownership and technically they are the same tax parcel? Or would we like to use Summers Drive as a clear delineation for the district?
Is that the Farnsworth property?
That one is included. It's the kind of longer red piece going out to the west. What if it added the parcel just to the north of it, which stands alone on Summers Drive, so that it kind of completed
All
that
of
whole
Summers
run?
Drive, the
Yeah.
corridor? Yep. I think that makes sense. And then your, you know, parcels that are facing the same right of way are subject to the same regulations, so you'll have that consistency. So if that makes sense to everyone else,
And
I
it's
would,
okay with the airport there too, right? Doesn't change anything.
I agree with that.
Here's the airport over here. Kimberly and Eric, this is something I think we're gonna have to work with Kimberly on. I think it makes sense either to have all of Summers Drive included or this other side not, whichever case is more appropriate. But I know we have a proposed development currently, and I would hate to adopt this and then have the new development be pre-existing non-conforming. So I just think we need to look at that a little closer.
okay. Which parcel is the proposal on?
It would be, yeah, actually the mouse is right on it.
Okay. And the time frame for that moving forward is probably quicker than this getting adopted?
It's always tough to say with this particular developer. It says it's gonna move quickly, but it usually doesn't move that fast. I would think that probably the first phase of this form-based code might be able to be done before he comes in with a proposal.
And that would be an interesting first test case, if that's the case, so.
What he's told us so far is maybe doing like 4-unit housing, like nicely developed, kind of, you're familiar with Buffalo, like the Elmwood Village
Yep.
Area, you know, this kind of larger, they look like single family homes, but there's 4 units or something like that. So,
Yep. Okay, which would be permitted,
like in that,
would just have some additional design parameters, so. Okay, I mean, I do like the idea of having it the same district facing both sides of Summers Drive, but we can certainly talk more about that with the town offline and just in light of
Yeah.
the proposal, make sure that makes the most sense.
I have a question.
Yes,
I'm wondering why we don't have the 332 sub area or the red section extending up the north side of Macedon Road, like where Eric's office is, for example.
So, do you think that it's substantial that, you know, there's 2 form-based code districts, there's the kind of yellowish one and the reddish one. Do you think that the difference there is substantial that it's not included in there?
I just feel like the north side of Macedon Road is already sort of being built in a similar manner to what's going on and what we're trying to encourage along 332. So I'm wondering if we should kind of fill in that little triangle there with Randy Road and Macedon Road there.
And I would have to go back and look, and I can follow up, but I know in one of our first meetings when we were talking about boundaries, we actually talked about this exact location in a significant amount of detail and ended up on this scenario where it was part of the mixed use development. And I think that had to do with some of the existing uses and compatibility.
And also the fact that like that corner goes for sale, which probably will in my lifetime. It's gonna be whatever that developer wants to put there, because they could potentially own quite a bit of land. Right, I mean, disagree with me if I'm wrong, but if you're talking about from that corner up past the collision shop, past their, Eric's office, is what I'm thinking, but if I'm mistaken. And it's,
Yeah.
the car dealership on 352, it's a good chunk of property.
Yeah, our original map, I think, did have it going up farther Maston Road, and we reverted back to this map based on.
If you guys that are in the Anna Linda room could use a microphone, please. It is very difficult to hear you guys as much as possible. I think one of the other things, Adeline, we can certainly look at that more too, is I believe the form-based code also allows the pinkish color allows for more commercial type aspects. And the yellow, I think, is more mixed use. And so you start to get into a residential area there. I'm not sure we'd want a 2 or 3 story commercial building that would be allowed in the pinkish area, maybe on Macedon Road. So it's definitely something to look at though.
As I recall, the yellowish area, it had a to be completed on it, right? Do you, what kind of differences do you foresee between the two of them? As far as, uses, size, bulk density?
The intent is to make it more conducive to mixed use density and to allow a greater range of residential use types, which is not how, so a lot of that, because we're not necessarily dictating a lot of uses by right, a lot of that is done through the design standards, which are the piece that still needs to be completed. So transparency, for example, might be different, whereas requiring a lot of transparency along Route 332 because that lends itself to commercial uses on the first floor. So we might see some reductions in transparency, for example. We'll also want to talk about some of those details, which I think would be our next meeting, because to date, we really have focused on the 332 corridor, but I think ultimately those regulations are going to be want to be more conducive to facilitating the appropriate mix of uses that lends itself to greater opportunities for residential as well.
And before we move off of this page, I had talked to Jim Volpe, who can't be here today, but and I think that we even mentioned his parcel in the last meeting, but he told me that he would like to be included in that mixed use development sub area. It's kind of right in between the Liberty Apartments and that parcel right there. Instead of being like left out on that side of the road.
Okay.
This is Michael Mills. Just a quick question. It's actually aligned with on page 60, where we talk about the 332 corridor and what we're recommending use there. We don't talk about residential at all in terms of mixed use, and so it ties to what we're talking about here. So just so we're clear as we're defining this, we are not encouraging mixed use to have top floor residential in the red 332 corridor.
We are. That's a good catch that it's not specifically stated here. We are, in addition to everything that is listed here, I think upper story residential or some of that higher density residential would make sense within this corridor. So we can be more explicit on page 60 with regards to defining that.
Because then that does raise the question of if you extend up past the office, that it could make sense to have mixed use with upper floor residential in there.
Yep.
So I have a question, is this thing, yeah, this is Bertie. I have a question. When we go north of Thomas Road, there's some frontage that sort of is in between Route 332 and Center Point Golf Course leading up to Acustas. Is that part of the PUD, or why did we not include that?
That's part of the PUD.
Okay, thank you.
And ultimately, we will be addressing those regulations after we wrap up the form-based code piece.
Andy, I thought you were going to ask about the parcel that's adjacent to Candlewood, which I believe is also, in all the stuff that we've looked at with Uptown, we've looked at this parcel that I'm showing here is being included with this. I think we need to go back and think about adding that back in, as well as the Volpe parcel.
So that
I would agree with that, Doug. I was actually looking at the park as one of the 3 parcels, but you're right, that parcel that's currently owned by Stell probably should be in the district.
And we don't have the map here to reference, but just as a reminder, so in addition to this form-based code district, the parcel that you're just pointing to, Doug, as well as other parcels on that side of the form-based code district, we were going to be creating a mixed residential zoning district that was not form-based. It is intended to be more of a traditional district. So that was going to be a new district that will get added into your existing zoning. And then the industrial district and the PUD will also get updated as part of kind of phase 2 of the zoning updates.
So to piggyback on Doug's comment, I'll call it the Stell parcel. That's really the only major vacant parcel that's left to be developed between this district and the apartments at Candlewood, or whatever they call themselves today. So rather than having a separate zoning just for that, I would be in favor of including it into the district.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Kimberly, do you foresee the mixed residential district being like less dense or less apartment based than even Candlewood would be?
And so if you think back to the Uptown master plan, right? It kind of Fire Hall, closest to Fire Hall is where we were really talking about that mixed use, high density along the frontage. And then as you kind of back in to the east, you would start to see that density go down. So you would have higher density residential as part of the mixed use. You might have another layer of high to mid density residential, and then ultimately would flow into more of a single family development style. So ultimately how we came up with the lines for, okay, where's the form-based code, where's this new mixed residential district, was based on, again, that premise of the Uptown master plan. Now, if the vision truly wants to be, okay, we know residential is going to be permitted in this mixed use district, we know that we can modify the parameters. I mean, we could even create a third sub area in the form-based code as opposed to creating more of a traditional zoning district. But again, we have to really determine what makes the most sense. Are we okay with a mix of uses in that area as long as they conform to these design parameters? Or do we really truly think that as a transitional area, residential alone, whether it's high, mid, or low density, makes the most sense in those locations?
So I'll make one more comment, and I promise I'll be silent. The Stell property, I'll refer to it as, and then next to it, that long skinny piece is the Syracuse property. And then those two sort of, I guess, flag lot looking things are the Hanson property. The Syracuse property is going to be really difficult to develop on its own. So I think it does make sense to have the same zoning parameters for the Stell property as we have for the Syracuse property.
So we can maybe, as part of our next meeting, bring back kind of the zoning map that we had landed on and maybe make some tweaks to that, and then determine whether the mixed residential stays as we had originally envisioned as a standalone zoning district, or whether that gets encompassed maybe as part of this form-based code is either we select a couple properties that we want to add back in, or maybe it's a third sub area as part of the form-based code with a different set of design parameters that lend itself more to residential or, you know, a certain lower density of mixed use.
I think the concept that you're talking about does make sense, go from more commercial, high dense, a little bit less dense, and then sort of morphing into, I get it. but-
Yeah. Okay, so we can maybe plan, you know, if we get another meeting on the schedule, we can plan to revisit that before we kind of move into the next phase.
This might help for us all to kind of relook at it again. It's been a while since we've all been together looking at it
Yeah.
together.
Okay. Okay, so more to come on that. The next handful, well, I guess the next page, rules of interpretation, exemptions, relationship to the town code. Any questions or thought on that? And maybe a question, I guess, for Eric or Doug or Sarah. So we refer to zoning officer throughout. Should we change that to code enforcement officer throughout, or what's the correct terminology we should be using?
I think that given some possible changes, that we just need to have another conversation about that and look at that a little bit more before we can discuss that publicly.
So we'll just note that as something that might be changed moving forward.
Yes.
Use this one too. It's not turning on. Okay, I've got lots of microphones. None that are apparently working.
We can hear you better now, whatever you just did, so.
Oh, I moved the non-working microphone closer, so there you go. Maybe it doesn't need the green light, Sarah. I don't know. It doesn't look like it's on, but maybe it is, and the green light's just not on. Okay. Any other questions on page 5, the rules, exemptions, relationship to the town code? Okay. So page 6 includes compliance thresholds. So these are essentially stating which actions, if undertaken on a given property, would trigger compliance with the new set of regulations included within the form-based code. So if something happens, what do you then have to comply with? So depending on what that action is, you can see there's different elements of requirement. Obviously, new development, you're fully complying with this new code update, but depending on if you're modifying an existing building up to 50% of square footage, more than 50%, you know, what's your remodeling work look like? Are you adding new signage, modifying signage? So all of those activities, and you know, when are certain requirements triggered?
For my purposes, enforcing it, I think this is an excellent table. It's really easy to read. I wonder if we can make the X's or whatever more prominent,
Sure.
something like that. And, you know, I see part of the reason why they appear smaller is, you know, the row is large in a couple instances. If we can define exterior remodel or something, so we don't have to add the stuff, the clarification of that.
Yep, we can define that in the definitions. Or even under the table if easier, so it's all referenced on the same page. Okay. Okay, and then the Page 7 deals with non-conformities. You know, and essentially the way that this is written, if there's non-conforming use, so in this case, unless it's a, you know, prohibited use, it's more about the design parameters. If that use does not change or is not modified, you know, there's no change in use, there's no change in physical appearance. The way it's written now, that can exist in essentially perpetuity, right? It can, there's no time frame set forth currently unless there's one of these triggers that occur. Is everyone comfortable with that, or did you want to set a designated time frame?
I don't think we should set a time frame.
Okay. So then, you know, we do talk about, again, some of the triggers with regards to, you know, if a property is altered or repaired exceeding 50% of the value in a 10-year period, then it must comply with the design standards. You know, it cannot be, a non-conforming use cannot be extended, expanded, enlarged. No change in use unless it complies, but again, if it's non-conforming, it's already not complying with the design parameters. So change in use is a little less pertinent in a form-based code than it is in a traditional zoning code. We've set a time frame for discontinuance. So if a non-conforming use ceases to exist for a year or 12 months, it cannot be reestablished, and it would be required to conform to the form-based code moving forward after that time, and the same time frame for abandonment. Any concerns or thoughts on that?
And so, if somebody was going to, let's say, change a non-conforming structure, but maybe they brought it somewhat into conformance, but not entirely, they could go to the zoning board for relief, correct? That would be the process for them?
Yes, so if they were modifying it, but not coming into conformance, yes, they would have to go to the ZBA.
Really isn't much different than how it operates today.
Correct.
Hey guys, it's Adeline. I may have to pop on and pop off. The Zoom disappeared for me for some reason.
Okay,
We're
we
not
can
sharing the
see you.
screen anymore for whatever reason.
Oh, yeah. We might have lost Doug, so you might have. We'll keep going as we get the screen share back up.
Sorry. The Wi-Fi, keep having to reset it and work on the network changes here, so it's unstable.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so section 2 of the code is has to do with development review. So the first page essentially provides a table that sets out the review process, and we can talk about whether this makes sense. You know, this was preliminary based on some conversations that Sam and I had with Eric and Sarah, and we can just make sure we kind of captured that interpretation correctly, but we are recommending that a pre-application meeting is required for any project. So that way, before anything formal is even submitted, applicants are coming in, they're talking to Eric, they're sitting down, they're understanding what the expectations are, they're walking through any kind of questions about the code, how to interpret it, and everyone's kind of in agreement before a formal application is even submitted. Then the applicant submits the application. If an application, we're recommending a two-phased approach. So either an administrative or a full site plan approval process. So on page 13, just going to kind of jump around a little in my head. On page 13, there's a blue box that identifies administrative review thresholds. So if a project comes in that's new construction less than 2,499 square feet, it's just modifications to a building facade or architectural features that's consistent with the requirements of the form-based code, site improvements without any impacts to the building, expansion of parking lot up to 10%, or utility system improvement modifications. These proposals can be reviewed internally by Eric. So Eric would essentially have a checklist that shows, okay, these are the requirements of the form-based code, check, 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 meets them all is well with those. Anything that does not meet those thresholds for administrative review would then go to kind of the full review process, which again, we can, and this may not be as clearly defined in the application review process table, but essentially a more traditional site plan review process would follow anything that does not meet those administrative review thresholds. So Eric would still, or someone, the zoning officer would review the application for completeness. If needed, it would go to the zoning board of appeals if something based on that internal review is not met in compliance with the form-based code. It would go to the ZBA to determine whether those variances would be approved, and then ultimately the planning board would make a decision on approval or denial. In this scenario, it does not go to the town board. It is reviewed at the planning board level. Is town board review something that, I know that occurs today, right, in some instances?
Only for rezoning, like if they were doing the MUO rezoning process, it would go to the town board.
Okay,
The town board is given the planning board that authority, so that doesn't occur,
okay,
just rezoning.
okay. So does this?
So I'm a little confused. I thought earlier in the planning process we had in one of our meetings discussed that the town board would be more involved in the review of these site plan applications early in the process. And that was one of the reasons we were choosing form-based code.
I thought that it was, we were kind of rezoning to a form-based code so that we had a more clear vision of what this area might look like, which would negate the responsibility or necessity to go to the town board, so that the planning board and the zoning board could enforce the rules that the town board put forth. In the same way that they do today with site plan approval and zoning board, none of that goes to the town board. The town board doesn't see.
Yeah. It was just my understanding that if there were variances applied for, big differences from what's in this zone, in this plan, that would be reviewed by the town board.
The zoning board denied something, if they felt it was too substantial or something like that, they would have to go to the town board for any kind of relief.
Yeah.
But otherwise, the zoning board is the body by state law that would hear those requests, and the town board puts them in that position.
And we can add that to the flow chart to show that if the ZBA approves or denies, and then if denies, it goes to the town board. So that's clarified in the flow chart, if they choose to.
Hey guys, I've got one question. I'm kind of new to all this, and this is one of the first meetings I've been able to jump in on. Is this, help refresh my recollection, is this all part of the MUO area?
Well,
Mixed use overlay or no?
keep in mind, we have 3 MUO areas in the town of Canandaigua, so this is specific to the area that is currently referred to as MUO 1 and just the 332 areas. So this would not entail like the MUO 2, which is the gateway area, or the MUO 3, which is the 364 area.
Right, but this is an MUO?
The current MUO 1, yes.
Okay, and the plan is to change it from MUO to form-based?
Correct.
Okay, because it was my understanding too that the MUO did give the board the town board the flexibility to look at that, that process and be an oversight for that process.
The current MUO process absolutely does. It gives
And
the town board multiple opportunities to weigh in. What they're proposing here obviously does not. And I think both to Jared and Adeline's comments, I've heard from some town board members that they would like more input in the process. And I've also heard from some that have said that, you know, that's really the job of the planning board. But I can tell you that I don't really think that debate has taken place at a town board meeting yet. So we might be at a point where the town board needs to have a debate and a discussion about that and give some direction.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. I could fully support that. At least get it out there, discuss it, and see where we want to go.
and we can absolutely do that. I will say that one.
I also
Oh, go ahead.
think
Oh, did we lose him?
I'll
All
go
right.
ahead, Kimberly.
Keep those up.
So for those that can hear me, you know,
Is he upstairs? Just make him come downstairs.
I was gonna say, you know, one of the jobs of the form-based code is to take out that subjectivity that might come into play with all of these various layers doing the review. It's going to be very clear. There's going to be a checklist. If an application can check yes, and meeting all of the parameters of the form-based code, there's no premise to deny that application. So it does take out some of that subjectivity that goes along with interpreting a traditional zoning code. And that is one of the benefits of a form-based code from a developer perspective. But then also part of the case that we make with form-based codes traditionally is, right, it simplifies that development review process. And that is also one of the benefits to developers and an incentive to developers. So the more layers we ultimately add into the process where we are no longer streamlining the process for developers, we're taking away that benefit of having the form-based code to begin with.
Thank you for mentioning that, because that's been swirling through my mind here for the last few minutes. Is I thought part of our goal, or one of our goals, was to streamline and simplify and hopefully attract responsible development. So we keep that in mind when we're talking about, you know, the process. I don't understand the whole process, but it seems like it could delay this for another few months, depending on what was said at which meeting.
Yeah. Just to add on to Kimberly's point, we are holding the form-based code to a higher threshold so that it meets these kind of attractive development guidelines that, of course, the town board will ultimately set forth, you know, so that we get them out of the way up front. And we don't have to do them on a project-by-project basis. You know, we have a vision that we've set forth in the Uptown plan and partially here in the form-based code that we want to see. Adding those development reviews is a disincentive to accomplish that vision.
Kimberly, I don't know if you guys can hear me. I think we're at a point specifically with this section where maybe page 10, 11, 12, 13, whatever it is, that we need to come to the town board and get some direction from them, because I think, to be quite honest with you, I think it's going to be a split vote. I don't think it's going to be unanimous. I think there's at least a couple who would like to see more town board interaction in this process. And I think there's some that would rather defer to the planning board. So I think we're at a point where we've got to get some direction on this particular process from the town board. I also think that the administrative review or denial, you know, and that's why I'd circled that in red. I think that's when I cut out. I think that there's probably some that are looking for planning board. Maybe it's a modified process, a very simplified process, but that also is the reason why we have that board that's familiar with land use regulations and stuff. So I think we've got some tweaking to do before we take this to the town board, but I do believe we're at a point where we need to take this to the town board to get some direction on this.
I think that's a good idea. Speaking as one town board member, I agree. And we set the planning board up for a specific purpose. And I agree with the red circle. But he already knows.
So Sarah, we can coordinate with you to maybe get on a future agenda with the town board, and we plan to do a brief update and presentation and maybe have a discussion on some of these key areas. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so let's skip over this section for now, and we can report back after we have a meeting with the town board and get some additional perspectives on that. And so if we want to move to, and maybe we don't even have to spend a lot of time on section 3, which is terms and interpretation. Again, we can provide the list that has been put together of new terminology that's been added that is not existing within the current code, the specific terms that we have modified the definition of, so folks can go back and do a comparison between what's in the existing code and what's been proposed here. And then any other terms not on that list are essentially copied from your existing code. But if there were any particular terms that jumped out at people that you wanted to talk about, we could certainly do that.
I had a quick question. I think it was on, I believe it's page 10 of your document, page 14 of the draft. Can we ask for financing information to be required in the application? I'm just thinking of situations like the Steamboat Landing project. I don't know if it's legal to ask for financing information to be provided.
I don't think it's illegal.
So are we?
Are you talking about cash flow projections or their ability to finance the construction project?
Ability to finance the construction project.
Adeline, there is a way that the planning board has the authority in state law to ask questions that would help them make a decision relative to the developer's ability to complete the project. It's very specific wording. That's why I'm trying to be careful the way I answer this. And we'd have to check on that. But I recently had that conversation about something. So I know that there is a caveat, but it's very specific wording. So we would just need to look at that.
I would be interested in including something like that in the application process. I don't know how others feel about that, but I think we've seen that to be an important issue in our own town, or our own city, to be more specific.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that?
I just have an additional thought or two on that, is that somewhat, and there's a banker in the room here, so I have to be careful, right? But, you know, somebody could come in with a handshake from a bank. Okay, good. You know, we're going to give you the money to complete this project, but they're not going to go into a project probably with any kind of a commitment from a lender because they don't know what their total costs are yet. So I don't know what the language is not referring to. So, you know, obviously I do think it's important that there's some ability for somebody to finish something that they start, for sure. But it certainly wouldn't be fail-safe.
Yeah, it might be a situation where you try to get a resume of what they've developed before, and that kind of gives you an idea, because you're right, you wouldn't have a true commitment letter for 9 times out of 10. Unless they're that good of a developer, I think we'll just write it on sight unseen.
I recently had a conversation with the former planning board member too. We actually had a project in the town of Canandaigua where the planning board asked for some sort of financial documentation along that lines. And they were able to receive a basic letter saying that the financial ability is there, but that's all they could actually get legally. And they had looked into that with the attorneys and stuff. So it is something that the planning board currently has the option of doing, and it's certainly something that we can look at.
So I'm just not sure if the planning board has kind of the financial expertise to, I guess, make a judgment on it.
Well, but the planning board has the authority to hire any expert that they need for any matter. So they could bring in anyone to help interpret that if they needed that.
Okay. Okay, so then section 4, 5, and 6 essentially are really the meat of the regulatory elements of the form-based code with section 6, the mixed-use development area still to be fleshed out. But section 4 is essentially regulations or parameters that apply to both sub-areas. And in some instances, just provide direction on how to interpret a regulation or what the context is. In some instances, providing actual regulations that, again, would apply anywhere within the form-based code, regardless of sub-area. So the first section, measurements, is just describing, again, how, when you see the regulations for lot depth, lot width, building coverage, lot coverage, how are we actually measuring those? So taking any of the guesstimate out of, are you measuring it different than I'm measuring it versus how she's measuring it? It's clear, and images are provided to clearly define this is how measurements are to be determined. So that's starting on at least my version, which might not be the same. Page 30, 31, 32, 33, and 34. So all of those, again, are just really informational and contextual information for applicants. Any questions, or was anything unclear in reviewing that section? Okay, then we get into actual building elements. So those are broken down into a couple of different topics, really awnings and balconies from a building perspective. So again, graphics provided to help applicants understand, and the planning board to clearly understand how are measurements to be taken, what are it that we're regulating. And then in the Roman numerals, you can see some of the actual regulations are starting to be incorporated. So I do think that, and certainly open to taking comments, but we did spend, I think, a couple of meetings talking about these sections in greater detail and have made all of the modifications requested thus far. So we've got awnings, we have balconies, and then as it relates to site standards, we discuss location of parking, general parking requirements, bicycle parking requirements, landscape.
I have two really,
Oh, yep, go ahead.
I've got two real quick questions. First of all, your permitted, not permitted photos of the balconies. I think it's unclear because of the two levels there, which one's permitted and not permitted. So you need like a line between them or something. I'm assuming you're saying the ones on the right are both not permitted and the ones on the left are both permitted. I think that's a little unclear. And the second question I had is, are we talking right now, which sub area are we talking about? 332, the entire area, or I was confused about that?
This is section 4, so it's rules for all sub areas. So these apply to both of the sub areas. So section 4 is applicable to both. Section 5 is applicable just to 332. And then section 6 is just applicable to the mixed use area.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And this is Michael. Are we talking specifics yet? I just had a specific on page 38 about parking.
Yep, we are well into specifics.
Excellent. So just a correction, it says non-slop, and I think we mean non-slip. But question relating to, encouraging versus requiring. Obviously pervious pavement is generally advisable from an environmental standpoint, but we talk about it here not as a requirement and is something that's encouraged. Do folks have thoughts on whether we want to require, pervious pavement for large parking lots?
How do you define large? How are you picturing large?
Well, I wasn't using that as a definitive parameter, just saying these, mixed use developments are going to have parking lots. They're not tiny little pieces of concrete. They're large pieces of asphalt that, can direct water into, our water sources. Or anyway, my point being, I'm not trying to determine whether it's for large or small. I was just making the point that we're going to have concrete patches, and would we encourage or require them to be pervious? I would lean towards requiring them to be pervious, but open to what the others think.
So we do have a little bit of experience with that. We actually have had a project in the town of Canandaigua where for stormwater control purposes, pervious pavement was put in, specifically blacktop. The problem is that it's not really enforceable after construction is complete. And a C of O is issued, life goes on, and guess what? 2 years later, that pervious blacktop was all sealed and is no longer pervious. So that's the problem with it. It becomes an enforcement issue. In some aspects, from a stormwater control perspective, you want to make sure that you're designing for the runoff anyway to capture it. So for instance, in that particular situation, now you've got that pervious pavement that's sealed and the water's running off of it. It's got to go somewhere. So we've just got to take that into account. And I know that the developers in that particular project, the developer was complaining like crazy because of the additional expense installing the pervious pavement. When all is said and done, I don't know that we saw any real value from having pervious pavement in that particular standpoint.
Doug, if you can hear us, we're not able to hear you.
Sorry, Doug. You gotta
We're doing. Are you still there? Can you hear me now? It's a Verizon commercial. Can you hear me now?
And, we do, I know it's not the same as permeable pavement, but we do require more landscaping area in the form-based code than I think is currently allowed by your code within parking lots. So I think that will be some, provide some benefit along those lines, but it sounds like at a minimum, Doug was not in favor of changing that to a requirement. I don't know how others feel.
I'm no engineer, but it would seem to me that retention and detention and stormwater management would be more of a long-term solution than the other.
I could weigh in. I would agree. There's huge cost issues, and if the stormwater retention and runoff plans are appropriate, giving the developer freedom to use a variety of materials is certainly sensible. In some cases, the pavers that have more permeability are going to be more attractive, and they'll go in that direction, but expenses are significant, and the question of their viability in the long term is up in the air as well. So getting the plan right from a retention point of view seems to me to be the best approach here.
I think for stormwater purposes, which is kind of the big reason we have, or we might use permeable pavement asphalt. This is within the 332 drainage district, so we have a lot of facilities out there already to manage a lot of the drainage. It might need to be changed, right? But this area certainly won't impact the town's drinking water because it goes to the Brook Greenway and heads north as opposed to going to Canyon Lake.
Eric, how does these proposals compare with the ordinance that we're considering now for parking? Is there any, can you comment at all?
So Terry's asking about how these parking requirements relate to a proposed ordinance that the ordinance committee is working on about minimum off-street parking permits. As I recall from this draft, it doesn't say anything about the requirements, the required number of it. It kind of leaves it up to what the town code requires in other sections. And so there is no conflict there between the two. It does, as Kimberly mentioned, require different landscaping than the town's off-street parking requirements in 22073 or whatever it is. There are higher aesthetic requirements, I guess, for parking lots in the form-based code than there is in the standard zoning code. But I don't see it as really being in conflict otherwise.
Be like rear to the side, is that?
Yes, in this district, yes, there's no front lot, there's no parking lot between the street and the front facade.
No, Randy Brunswick.
Yeah.
With respect to Randy.
Okay, any other questions or thoughts on the parking or bicycle parking requirements? Okay, and then we have landscaping standards. So these are divided by, screening and buffer requirements, installation and maintenance requirements. We do include recommended plant size and recommended plant materials. Just to help people make, typically any of the larger scales developments are going to have a probably design team that knows all of this information, but thought this would be helpful context for even some of the smaller developments of just types of materials that are going to be most likely to be successful in our environment. And then we have provided a series of just representative images to show what some of those recommendations look like. And then on page 43, we get into specifically to parking lot landscaping. And again, per previous discussion, we do get into more specificity and a higher level of regulation for parking lots of 30 spaces or more. So when we really want to start to break up that sea of asphalt.
Caroline Rudolph here. Just a quick question. Is this fairly industry standard? I wouldn't want it to be cost prohibitive for a project, but just wondering if this landscaping is fairly standard.
It's fairly standard and probably from a form-based code perspective, more on the lenient side than the aggressive side.
Okay, great.
So just a question on the landscaping. So in the future, if we were going to have a new car dealership, for example, they would not be able to display cars between the building and the road. It would be on the side or the rear. Would these landscape rules per se apply to a display lot for example, a car
Yes.
sales dealership? Okay, great.
But if they were to buy like Randy or Diesel, they can keep it the same, right? It's the same.
As long as the, yes.
Yeah.
You're not changing
I'm
the
thinking
use, you're
about
not
the
changing the
price.
building, you're not changing the site.
But again, they can go to the zoning board for relief, and the zoning board, one of their considerations is the character of the neighborhood. So they will apply that appropriately.
And then the next subsection within this, again, we're in the applicable to all sub areas are the lighting standards. So we do have general requirements. We have specific lighting requirements for parking and pedestrian areas. And we, again, show a graphic where we're trying to visually represent expectations for lighting. And then we cover screening, so screening of service areas, screening of roof-mounted equipment, wall-mounted equipment, and ground-mounted equipment. So specific regulations applicable to those types of screening, again, along with visual representations of permitted screenings examples. Any questions on any of those, on the lighting or the screening requirements? Okay, and then we do have the outdoor amenity space. So this was something we had discussed at previous meetings, requiring it only as part of a residential development or as part of a mixed-use development that has a residential component. So the developer of any of those types of properties have to provide an outdoor space associated with that development, which could be a playground, it could be a path, it could be just a, brick paver patio area. It could be a rooftop deck, it doesn't have to necessarily be on the ground, but making sure that that additional amenity is provided as part of the development. So we do have, again, the table provides parameters. So if a development building size is under 2,500 square feet, it's not required. 200 square feet is required between 2,500 and 5,000 square feet. And then over 5,000 square feet, it's 5% of total building square footage. Okay. Sidewalk dining,
I'm sorry, for the public amenity space there. I can't recall, did they have the opportunity of like sharing or leasing nearby space?
we did not include that as an option. The intent is for it to be on site.
It was like within 2 minutes or something like that. Because I see that it says anyways, that it's gotta be publicly accessible. So anybody could come use it, right? That's kind of what that means.
It's publicly accessible from the perspective of the development.
Okay.
So it needs to be available to that particular development site, not necessarily anyone walking down the street can come and sit on the rooftop deck.
Can we make that more clear? That I was thinking of like the potential 4-unit apartments or something like that. It would be to have just anybody be able to walk on site.
Yeah, no, that's not the intent, so we can clarify that. Okay. So then sidewalk dining, actually supposed to be, we've got a conflict here. 4 seats per every 10 linear feet of restaurant frontage, so.
I thought we said 6.
Oh, so that,
My comment anyways is that
to go to
6.
6. Okay. So we've got 4 and 6, so I think in here currently, we can choose which one we like. Does anyone, so Eric's voting for 6, so slightly more per linear footage. And again, even, you'd still have to comply with all the other regulations. So is everyone comfortable with going up to 6?
If you look at that photo there, that's above the standard section, those look like 6 top tables, as I recall. I think it's the photo above that. But, in my opinion, or I think there's a 4 top and a 2 top just across it. So they're still, relatively attractive even in that image, to where 6 per 10 seems still good.
Okay, I'm fine with 6. Is everyone else fine with 6?
I think given the current situation with COVID, the 6 actually would provide some more flexibility if we have to practice something like the social distancing and that sort of thing. Who knows how long that'll last, so.
Yep.
Well, recent developments. It's a new recent development.
So then we get into the sign standards. So the first 5 pages of this section are, identifying where permits are needed, where permits are not needed, but any additional regulation associated with those. Prohibited sign types, and then some general regulations associated with illumination, materials, removal, and indemnity. Before we get into those signs requiring a permit, were there any thoughts or comments on this section? I think we talked about signs at length previously as well.
Yeah, is there anything just for like what I'm experiencing now, like for grand opening stuff? Do you do any kind of special, like for 30 days, you can have additional signage, sandwich shops or sandwich signs or what have you?
Sandwich signs require permit currently.
Okay.
And that, that's ones we're seeing as more of a discussion. We've actually found more communities wanting to take that out because it's temporary and goes in at the end of the day. you know, we've seen actually more communities starting to take those out of those requiring a permit and just making sure there's the regulations in there that say it can't go out before 8 AM and must be back inside by closing and location, so you're not impeding, you know, pedestrian traffic flow and stuff. So that might be something we want to modify here.
Size would be-
Sizes, yeah, you know, they're very traditional, like 2 by 3 foot size, come kind of standard.
Can we add it so that it doesn't require a permit, but you have those kind of
Yes,
standards? And then, you know, if in the future it does become an issue that the Concord thinks should be permitted, they can make that change.
Yep, they can do that. And I'd say that's very consistent with recent precedent that we've been seeing. So we will take that out of signs requiring a permit, integrate it, but still make sure there's adequate regulation tied to it. So then that would leave us with awning, projecting, wall and window signs, as well as monument signs for those signs requiring a permit. And again, you know, we've provided graphics for each of those, clarifying exactly how all of the regulations are defined, where the different sign types can be located. And then, so these are, the standards in this section are general parameters that again would apply to both sub areas as it relates to sign area, you know, how far, how much clearance do you have to provide for, say, like a projecting sign. And then when we get into the 2 sub areas, there's another layer of detail with regards to sign regulation.
Kimberly, I'm just wondering if we could include in a, it's because I'm working on a emergency preparedness plan that is now required by the state of New York because of the health situation. But under government signs, if perhaps we could include just a reference that signs relating to health emergency situations or basically would be exempt as a governmental sign. For instance, like you see the signs, you must wear a mask.
Yes.
For instance, going in a door, or like directional signs, those types of things.
Yep, absolutely. Things we weren't thinking about in February. Okay, we will make that addition too. Anything else on signs in general? Okay, so then we get into the regulations specific to the Route 332 corridor. So on the intent page, we talked about earlier, a good catch about adding residential as a component to the vision for this sub area. We do have our list of prohibited uses. And I know there was a question about single family residential, which is different than a townhome or multifamily residential or duplex. And this might be a good forum for discussion on, you know, you could in reality have a single family residential that can meet that is willing to have a very transparent first floor because they're going to put lines up and is willing to meet the design recommendations that are included within here. And is that okay? Is that something that is desired, or do we want to continue to prohibit single family?
So somebody could develop a multi-story residential building with first floor residential, as long as it met the design parameters under what we have now.
Yes.
So the question is it just a single family?
Correct.
But again, somebody could put a multi-family as long as they, okay.
You can talk about the economics out there right now. Does it even make financial sense generally to purchase a lot right there along 332 and build a single family residence on it?
No.
So, you know, the effectiveness of prohibiting single family residential is kind of moot.
Well, I guess I would argue, right, part of doing a form-based code or any zoning is you're regulating for a long term because it's not financially feasible and even we can all think around the room, who's really gonna build a single family house on 332? Like that makes no sense. But there is someone out there, right, hypothetically, that might think, I don't care how much the parcel costs, this is where I wanna live, because there's so many cool things now going on around it. Look at how great this place is becoming, right? So you're wanting to be proactive in how we're regulating.
So it reminds me of, there's a place, I think it's on East Avenue in Rochester, that actually is a residential building in the commercial area. And I'm trying to think of who owns it. I think it's the people that own, what's the big factory in Fairport, these sauces and
Is it pedestrian?
Ledestri's. I think it's Ledestri's house. Okay, that's that right there, which does blend in very nice, and you probably spent a fortune, but I would be in favor of striking the single family home development area. Doesn't make any sense, but I think I would be in favor of putting it in there.
You never know, there are some people who live in glass houses.
Exactly. Those are the ones everyone knows.
So Doug, I know this was a concern of yours, as long as we're explicit in defining single family residential, are you comfortable leaving this in as a prohibited use?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to have conversation about it, right? The exact conversation that just took place. There's pros and cons. But I think we have to clearly define it. Again, and I think I sent my note to you, the example of, we have called townhomes single-family residential because they're sold. There's a title. The land is technically around the square of the townhome. And we have in the past, we have a project in the town of Canandaigua where we've said, okay, that's single-family residential. So, we just need to be very explicit in the definition if we're going to prohibit it. So.
That's a good point.
Yep. Okay. We will make sure that that's very clear. And I see, these are the fun conversations you have in zoning meetings. I see you have nude model studio highlighted, but I don't have your markup as to.
I do. Let me actually, in just agriculture use, before we get to that, just agriculture use, again, in the definitions here, one of the things that I think we have to be careful of is, think for instance, Star Cidery. Star Cidery is a new business in the town of Canandaigua. It's an agriculture operation. Are we saying we don't want Star Cider in Uptown? So again, we just need to be clear. I get the intent is probably that we don't want a farm field and farmed because the intent is to protect other portions of the town of Canandaigua. But again, we just need to be clear on what it is that we're trying to do here.
Yep, no, that's.
I think that's another good point. So somebody could open up like a permanent farm market.
Which would be great.
Which would be awesome.
Yeah. Okay.
And that leads to my highlight here on the nude model studio also. Because again, the definition, I understand the intent based on the readings here, but you think about, there's a lot of, and I wanted to have a conversation, I just didn't get a chance to reach out to the Arts Council. There's art studios all over where they do plaster mill castings, and you think back even to the Greece and the ancient figures and stuff, and there were castings and stuff. Are we saying that we would not allow an art studio like that? Again, it's more about the definition and what the intent is to eliminate or not. So.
And so we'd essentially taken all of the sub uses under adult uses from your existing code and transferred them to be applicable here. So these are references from your existing code.
I know, and again, we haven't had the opportunity to have that conversation, but since it's before us now, it's like, okay, now we can have that conversation.
Does sexually oriented businesses cover that though?
Yeah, so I think.
Maybe it's a little ambiguous.
Yeah.
What is?
Okay. And going back to the agriculture, I would actually suggest we remove that from this list, because the reality is they're not I don't think any agricultural uses that you wouldn't want would be able to meet the design standards within this code. I think those agricultural uses like a farm market, a cidery, that you would consider to be desirable for 332 could meet the design parameters within this code. So I would be comfortable recommending taking agricultural uses off of the prohibited list.
Did that? A similar point, like dog kind of
Yes.
standards for nuisances and stuff. Let's say it's a higher density residential area and people want to take their dog to the,
Yep.
what do they call it, the spa or whatever for the day when they go to work.
Yeah, we can
You know, as
strike
long
that
as they
too.
can meet the noise.
And it's really with dog kennels, it's the noise.
But they're kind
But
of a
they're
niche thing now too.
They
Yeah.
are doggy daycares.
Yep,
and
doggy
spa,
daycares
really
and-
doggy spas.
Right.
nowadays.
I was wondering about adult arcades, 'cause I don't know that farm 332 necessarily makes sense today, but like those are a thing now in more urban places. And if somebody wanted to take up the retail space, I'd be willing to listen to them. Keeping in mind that everything going on, it's probably not a hot idea today, but maybe 2 years from now, 5 years from now, if people really are moving in, density's increasing, that's,
What is it, dog?
it's like unless my interpretation is wrong, it is like an arcade, like it's just like video games, but for adults,
So no, this is,
unless
as-
it's something else.
as defined,
Okay.
it's more adult.
Oh,
It's not like the cool place in the South Wedge.
okay, that was thinking more like the cool place in the South Wedge, I strike that
I
comment.
believe that's called a barcade.
A barcade, I was thinking more barcade.
So, and, you have some very explicit kind of subtopics under adult uses and some very specific definitions for these in your existing zoning. Probably part of a bigger conversation, but many communities do simplify it to, a definition that's more along the lines of sexually oriented business, which captures then all of those different things in a more broad sense.
Would we be better off so that somebody doesn't try to slide in between someplace?
I mean, so I think you're covered because you actually have sexually oriented businesses as a subcategory under the adult uses. But if you wanted to simplify it as opposed, to avoid misinterpretations like what's an adult arcade, right? It's something that, you could think about unless the only times we typically see a lot of detail under adult uses is where in communities where it's historically been a problem. I don't know if it's historically been a problem here in the town or if this is an opportunity to kind of simplify the definitions, create more of that catch-all definition for sexually oriented businesses and kind of keep it simple at this point. Or if anyone feels strongly one way or another, this would really be a town decision on how to move forward.
I would suggest keeping it simple, but it's also not something that's come up in the past, so I wouldn't bother to waste too much time.
Okay. And then industrial uses. So we kind of clumped all the various industrial uses that are, again, currently explicitly identified within the existing code. And maybe it's too general and there are some that we need to prohibit, but maybe others that would be quite okay along the corridor as long, again, they're still gonna have to meet, unless they get a variance, they're still gonna have to meet all the design parameters and the nuisance requirements. So I know that was a concern of yours, Doug.
It was, and I actually just had to look at the note again to refresh my own memory, but I know one of the concerns I had in reading this, for instance, is, and I believe going back to the map that we looked at earlier, Pactive actually falls in this area, but according to this definition, Pactive would be pre-existing non-conforming. So, that's a concern, especially with a large business like that. Is that really the road we want to go down? This section in particular, I think that we really need to think about possible impacts. I know I use the example there. We have the Ryder truck facility also right along 332, which again would not be permitted, I think, based on my reading of this, or even, possibly even enterprise sales that's there. Maybe that wouldn't be allowed. So it's a question for a conversation, really. That's why I circled it. So.
Yep. So I think like an enterprise or a rider truck terminal would technically be permitted as a use, but again, with another layer of design regulation to the property, so it might look a little different than it does today. But you're clearly right on the active and warehousing and storage. So again, and with a form-based code, right, you have the backup of these design parameters. So a warehouse is going to come in, look at a property, look at the regulations that are encompassed with here, and say, this is not the right choice for me for this particular warehouse use. I'm going to go 8 blocks over to the industrial district, or make those decisions. So I'm always comfortable saying, unless a use is really strongly objected to, don't include it on the prohibited list, because you have a really tight set of design parameters that you're falling back on, which is the whole foundation for doing the form-based code. And frankly, uses are going to self-select out. And that's the intent of creating this. So if we wanted to take that list of industrial uses out, I would feel fairly comfortable, because I think the ones you don't want will self-select out to not be in this area.
I think definitely specifying it or trimming it down a little bit and making sure that we're not prohibiting every use that exists currently in the corridor or whatever.
I can recall one time at Parkside Greens, I'm not sure if it was actually permitted use, actually many years ago. Somebody was actually manufacturing and or assembling very high-tech communications equipment. And it was basically like an office setting, but they were actually assembling and manufacturing something there. So I don't know if that's something to consider.
And because, there are some maybe definition, and this is where it can also, you do get some subjectivity in the form-based code, right? Like if you have a brewery and it's not explicitly defined, someone could come in and say, I'm a brewery, I'm not prohibited, you're not listed. And then someone else who's maybe opposed to the project could say, oh, but you're, manufacturing. Brewery is technically manufacturing.
Yeah.
So because of the broadness, I would be in favor of either removing the industrial or trimming it. So we're making sure we're not by default excluding things that we actually want to make sure we're included, just because the definitions aren't encompassed, like a brewery, a cidery.
Back to Doug's original comment about Pactive, though, this is only restrictions for the 332 sub area, correct? Couldn't we just have Pactive be in the mixed use sub area of the form-based code? Wouldn't that eliminate a lot of their non-conformities?
The mixed use will probably be just as prohibitive, even more so, maybe.
The bigger problem is if Pactive ever leaves, we have a bigger problem than what we're talking about right now.
Mm-hmm. I don't understand why Pactive would be considered part of the 332 corridor anyway, because it's not exactly a commercial use. It's not really what we're looking to encourage in the 332 region.
Doesn't appear to be in there.
Yeah, I don't think it is.
So Pactive, I'm showing on my cursor, I don't know if you can see it. Pactive is right here, but they also own this, and this, or this one.
Okay.
This one. So it's actually, they actually do own property on 332.
Okay.
And maybe that's where their office spaces are, or,
I don't think so, though. It's truck trailers, I think that's where they
is
go.
where they're storing.
I believe.
I'm saying like in the future, like if they wanted to develop.
just a big berm and a piece of grass.
But ignoring Pactive for a second, on Fire Hall Drive, there is some industrial, like manufacturing uses there. Is it Fire Hall in Kepner, I think?
Yeah, right here.
And right, all of those can stay as long as they want, doing exactly what they're doing. This is, and I think that's an important message. I think we portrayed very clearly at the first stakeholder meeting, and certainly when we do the second meeting with that group, hopefully of business owners like we did for the first, we would want to reiterate that. But even with these changes, it is not impacting any of your existing uses to continue doing what you're doing. But as uses change in the future, our goal is to change the character of this corridor. And that's, I think we shouldn't lose sight of that either.
That's an interesting.
Which brings up one other question. Why do we not have, I think a lot of people don't want any additional car dealership built. Why do we not have that as a prohibited use?
So a car dealership, as we know it today on the corridor, could never comply, would be non-compliant from a parking perspective, from a buffering perspective. We did have this discussion when we originally came up with this draft prohibited use list about, all sorts of uses we could include. And I think where we landed was, do not, kind of to this discussion, let's not include it if we know they're going to self-select themselves out. A car dealership is not going to look at this set of regulations and say, this is a good place for me to develop my new traditional car dealership.
Then I don't see much of a purpose in adding uses like junkyards and lumber yards, because they also then would not conform, so.
I would still add junkyards. I just think that's, it's impossible for that use to either comply with the form-based codes or just the use in general, but, minimizing the amount of industrial uses that we have there.
I think to Eric's point, I think junkyards, I think the outdoor storage of boats and boat accessories, that's not something that we really want to look at. I also want to just mention a conversation that I had with one of our favorite car dealerships. Was informing me that Cadillac has new requirements for their new car dealerships where it's more of a boutique store where there's maybe just a very small amount of vehicles. And I could see them constructing a new facility that actually does meet our criteria, and having one or two models available and a lot of electronic stuff inside the building where you go and you choose and you design your vehicle. So I would hate to put something in there that would prohibit them from being able to do it if they can meet all the other criteria.
Yep. Okay, so we will tweak this. We will remove ag, we will remove dog kennels, and then we will leave a limited number of those specific industrial uses that are truly in conflict with the desired intent and character of the sub-area.
We always have the ZBA too, right? So if somebody says, wait a second, I'm manufacturing Swiss watches.
Right.
Okay, you go to the ZBA and boom, you're in, I would assume.
Yeah.
But yeah, they could file an interpretation if they felt that they, were in definition that there's only not certain.
Okay. So
Well, I think we need to be careful though about someone having to go through the process of trying to get a use variance, because those are next to impossible to get. So that's why I'd rather err on the side of not including it. The stuff, as Kimberly said, is there for the form-based code. If they can meet that, then great, have at it. So.
Okay. So we're at 12:05. I am fine sticking around, but I know we scheduled the meeting from 10:30 to 12. I'm not sure how many people we have left online. Did you want to keep, we only have 3 more pages. Is everyone fine? Just kind of
3 more pages.
plugging through 3 more pages? Perfect. Okay. So again, we're now specific to the 332 sub area. We've got our prohibited uses, and then we get into the more specific building and site and sign requirements that are unique to this particular area. So we've got minimum and maximum lot depths and widths. And these, we did do some takeoffs and some examples of existing lots within the corridor. Our goal is not to, right off the bat, create all sorts of non-conforming lots. You do have some this was a unique situation because a lot of the parcels on 332 on the east side extend all the way to Fire Hall Road. So then it becomes, okay, do we double regulate do they have two fronts? How do we handle this unique scenario for some of these lots?
I
So,
can think of one that has three.
yeah,
The
there's,
Michigan East side has.
yeah, there's some really unique characteristics within some of the parcels in here. So you'll see at the bottom of this page, we do say that, you know, properties with frontage along two roadways are permitted if they desire. If they want to create a double frontage, they are permitted to essentially treat both of their frontages as primary streets. So essentially, they could almost double their development potential, meeting again, the parameters for primary frontage. So then they would have to, again, meet all of those setback requirements and other requirements. If the second frontage is not treated as a primary street, then rear landscape requirements must be met. So any buffer requirements or other physical requirements. But we thought it was important, knowing the vision for Fire Hall Road, it was important to kind of build in that flexibility to create that as another potential corridor in addition to Route 332. Is there any concern with that approach?
Kimberly, my question was more, is it feasible? I know we had talked originally with the Uptown study about maybe even like liner buildings along Fire Hall Road.
Yep.
In addition to, I mean, potentially there's a car dealership on 332, it's existing, and then maybe they develop a liner type building, a more narrow building on the back of the parcel. Is it feasible with this criteria?
Yeah, that's exactly what that text at the bottom of page 62 is intended to allow. So rather than just saying you can only, you know, 332 is your primary street, that's what you're developing. This is giving them the flexibility of saying, okay, I want to develop 332 because I want the visibility from the corridor, but I also want to do a liner building or another use on Fire Hall Road and create a frontage along Fire Hall Road.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so then, you know, with that caveat, again, if they opted to do both, they would have to conform on both sides to lot dimensions, setbacks. And those are identified here with minimums and maximums. And again, those were based on a lot of this detailed information we've talked about in past meetings in some level of detail. We've got a 45-foot structure height maximum, minimum of 15 feet. And I think you had a question, Doug, if you can hear us, on the height limitation. So essentially what we've said is 36, but if you have a building step back, you could go up to 45. So if you're standing on a sidewalk looking at a building, it looks like a 3-story building. But because many of these properties are so long, wanting to build in some level of flexibility for some of those, the thought was, okay, you can create a step back and then actually go up, get another floor in. And maybe we have to go up to 48 feet really to accomplish that, but you know, building in some flexibility there. We've got height encroachment. So again, those are above and beyond that maximum story limitation. We talk about the window transparency, building materials, pedestrian access requirements, and then the last piece of this is related to signs. So any given building is allowed up to 3 signs per building from that list of permitted signs, and sandwich sidewalk signs will come out.
For the allowable building elements, one of my earlier comments was about bay windows. Would that be appropriate to have? Is that regulated all elsewhere or what?
Bay windows are part of the building. They're not technically considered an encroachment. They would have, but like from your question, you know, if your setback line is here, the bay window can't go past the setback line. It's part of your building design that has to conform to the setback requirement.
So Kimberly, my question was specific. Well, first of all, I don't know what a parapet wall is. Can somebody help me out with that?
So that's like a fake wall above like the actual roof line.
Yeah, thinking of like Main Street in the city of Canandaigua, it's a 6-8 foot tall, like it's just, it creates a taller frontage sort of, but there's really no usable space behind it. You just kind of build it on top of the wall. Example for
Okay.
it. Yeah,
And then we've seen recently, and I know they're popular all around the country. We've seen on the top of Nick's Chop House, the outdoor dining with like the awning. I don't know what it's called, the gazebo, whatever, not that gazebo, but the thing that kind of gives you some protection from the sun up on top. If I build a 45-foot tall structure, it looks like because my parapet wall can only be 4 feet tall, I wouldn't be able to have rooftop dining and some of those types of elements. Is that correct?
So we can explicitly permit outdoor dining as a rooftop height encroachment that is separate from a parapet wall. Because I think you want to still have a parapet wall maximum of 4 feet if there is no rooftop dining. But then maybe we just need, again, things COVID's making us think about a little more clearly, be more explicit in permitting rooftop dining and gathering spaces. And we can do a little more research and figure out what are the reasonable requirements for that.
Yeah, to Doug's point, this could include like a pergola type approach or sails that are set, to provide sun blocking.
Yep. Okay, we will add that in here explicitly. So that kind of wraps up where we're at. The only remaining piece is getting into that same level of specifics, those essentially 3 pages of mixed use sub-area specific regulations, which I think will be easiestly done in another meeting where we have the same types of conversations we had in order to get us to this point for the 332 sub-area. So it sounds like that, as well as the development process, are kind of our immediate next steps related, aside from addressing all of these comments. So do we want to, Oksana, go ahead and schedule a next meeting, or do we want to do that by email and coordinate dates and times? I don't know if you have a set economic development meeting you want to utilize, or want this to be a standalone separate meeting. It's usually the first Tuesday.
Well, Kimberly, it's basically up to you. When will you have all the changes available?
So I guess it's a good question. We could talk about the mixed use sub area and maybe the map. We also want to revisit the map. So I think those 2 topics we could really schedule at any point. And then I think, we have to coordinate schedules for the town board workshop and could report back on feedback after that. But I think we could schedule a next meeting fairly quickly on the mixed use and the map discussions.
Okay, well,
Sorry. Okay.
why don't we do it by email, okay?
Yep.
Okay, and then we'll notify everyone.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so I will follow up with you on that, and then we'll communicate that day and time to folks, and then I will coordinate with Sarah on the town board piece as well. And if there's any other written comments or thoughts that people want to share, obviously feel free to email them directly to myself or Sam, and we can get those added to the discussion as well.
Just a question, if I could, on solar. I think I saw that large scale solar is prohibited. Is that correct?
And that's another one we could take out because the design parameter requirements, or as a standalone use, so.
I just wonder, so if we have, what is, the trolley station apartments, they would likely be considered a large-scale solar energy system, because our definition has it at like 1,000 square feet of, panel area. But, it's really just for that site. So even if like an apartment building or something like that wanted to have solar to service their facility, they would be considered large scale and thus prohibited. And I'm not sure if that's what we want.
So we could say, if we were 100% fine with it being part of a larger development, we could either remove it because it's going to be hard to meet the requirements, or we could on the prohibited use list say prohibited if as a standalone use, right? So it's fine if it's part of a larger development package, but if it's a standalone parcel that's only being developed with solar installations. But again, that's.
Yeah, because we don't want to make it so that people can't put solar
Right.
in like on their roof or something, or like Charlie did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
some
standalone makes more
installations
sense.
are very attractive. If you saw Apple's headquarters, you don't even realize it, but there's a huge solar array.
Yeah.
Built into the roof.
I think as a standalone makes the most sense to prohibit it as a standalone usage.
Okay.
Maybe it was a thought, there's one solar farm.
Right.
See.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for sticking with us for the whole time here. I think we got through everything, which is great. So a couple follow-up items, and then we will be back in touch with regards to immediate next steps.
Thank you.
Okay, Kimberly and Samantha, thank you so much, and for everyone attending. And we still would like to have an economic development meeting regarding the LDC and the updates that they may have for us. So that's something else that we need to plan for.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure, it doesn't seem big enough.